Hey everyone. Okay, so in the last video we looked over the aims and the powers of the League of Nations. So we looked at how it was aiming to prevent aggression to any nation, to uphold the Treaty of Versailles, to work towards international disarmament, to improve the living conditions of everyone. And we had a look at its powers, so moral condemnation, trading sanctions, military force. And in this video, we're going to be looking at the membership of the League. So who was in it, whether they actually made a difference, whether the membership of the League changed over time, and what this meant for the makeup of the League. So we've got at the start of the League, so the Treaty of Versailles was formed in 1919, and in 1920, the League of Nations actually was formed. So at the start, it's got 4 major world powers as members. So it's got Japan, Italy, France, and the British Empire. Now, the British Empire was quite big at this time. So that's got a lot of people behind it. As we can see here, we've got Australia, Canada, New Zealand, South Africa, and the United Kingdom. So a massive, massive portion of territory there, and this gave the League clout. That's a really nice word to use, I think, when you're talking about the League of Nations at the beginning in the 1920s. It's got a lot of power behind it, and with that amount of power, it can really intimidate people and force them, the smaller countries, to do things with threats, whether that be right or wrong. It can also help different countries to solve disputes, and that's really important that it's got those 4 big powers behind it at the start, because if it only had, let's say, 1 or 2, other people might not join. So more countries joined the League in the 1920s. Remember, the USA doesn't join it in the 1920s. The enemy powers were admitted. So you've got Austria and Bulgaria join in 1920, Hungary joins in 1922, and Germany in 1926. Now, remember, Germany was forbidden at the beginning, right at the start in 1920. Now, you might be thinking, why would you want enemy powers? If you are aiming for peace, you aren't going to have peace if you've got a peace organization that doesn't allow the aggressive countries in, or the countries that have just been defeated in a war. You want to be able to welcome everybody if you are looking to have peace. If they aren't in it, they're not going to benefit from it. They're not going to work together with the League. They're not going to have that option of arbitration, and they might go straight onto force. Okay, so it's really important that you include as many people as you can, as many countries as you can, to stop them having those arguments and those wars in the first place. Everybody needs to benefit from the League. So when they were judged to be fit and responsible members of the global community, okay? Because if you remember what we said in the last video, what's really important about the League of Nations is that it has the respect of its members. Because if these countries were going to join, and then if they did something wrong, the League was to say, right, this is your punishment, and they were just to say, get lost, we're not going to do that. There's no point in them being there. So until they could prove that they had the correct attitude, that they were going to be active members of the League of Nations and cooperate, they weren't allowed to join. As soon as they did, they were fine to come in. So the newly created states of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania were admitted in 1921, and other small states such as Albania and Costa Rica. So remember, the smaller ones are the ones who they are joining for defense, really. And in case a larger country was to attack them, they've got the backing of these smaller countries. And this is especially important after, with the rise of communism following the Russian Revolution of 1917. Okay, so by the end of 1934, it has its greatest number of members, which is 58. Okay, so a lot of countries, if they all work together, brilliant. The strength of the League, however, lay in not how many, but who was a member. So the admission of enemy powers, as we've said before, like Germany, was a major step forward because of the idea of collective security. Remember what I just said, if you were to lock Germany out of the League, then it is still a threat. When it can prove that it's able to work well with other countries, allow it in and let it work with them. So Germany was genuinely a world power, so its admission did strengthen the League. Now, it won't surprise you to learn that Germany later leaves the League of Nations because Adolf Hitler has absolutely no intention of working with other countries, but for now, it's in there. So the USSR joins the League in 1934. Now, remember what I just said about Russia. Some countries are scared of communism because of the Russian Revolution. So Russia joining is a massive thing because that's them saying, we might not actually be out to gain all this territory. We might not be out to conquer. We want to work with people. And they actually hoped that the League might be able to restrain Hitler. Okay, so the USSR, Russia, is worried about Hitler, and they're hoping that by being in the League, they can all work together against Hitler. Okay, so here's a nice little diagram of the membership of the League. So we've got the League of Nations 1920 to 1946. So obviously you can pause this video at any point and have a look at this map in more detail if you would like. So let's just zoom in a little bit more. So dark green, members of the League for the duration, so 1920 to 1946. Late joiners who remained in the League until the end. Colonies of League members, so that means that they were in it by default. Okay, so you can see that the United Kingdom is there as dark green, but also its colonies are in there as default. The League of Nations mandate, so territory that was given to the League of Nations for them to run, basically. Members who were expelled or otherwise left early. So membership of countries that lasted more than 15 years, membership of countries that lasted less than 15 years. So you can see the USSR is in there because it came quite late. So remember, like I said, you can pause and have a look at those countries at your own leisure. Okay, so let's have a look then about what actually happened with the membership of the League. So the idea of the League of Nations was one where all countries joined in order to promote peace across the world, and that was exactly what Wilson intended for it to be. It was hoped that the United States would lead the way in the League and promote the ideas of peace and security across the world. So remember, they suggested it, so that it was absolutely unfathomable that something that somebody had suggested they then would be no part of. Britain and France didn't really want the League of Nations, they hadn't suggested it, and they're actually left to run it. It was like, right, we'll have the League, we'll put it in the Treaty of Versailles, America can run it and we'll just join. That's not the way it worked. They ended up running the whole thing. So it was very unpopular in the United States, and he did have a tough start and he didn't win. So in order to join the League of Nations, the US Congress had to agree to join. The sale was difficult, as many in the US felt that after the First World War, they shouldn't get involved with European affairs. Okay, and in the 1920s, and if you're doing the America course, it does fit beautifully with this part because you'll look at this then. They had a policy of isolationism. Sorry, that's not, I just said that then, I thought that's not correct. Isolationism. They are completely isolated from the rest of the world, and they look after their own economy, and they look after their own people, and they don't want to get involved in other people's affairs, because when they have, it hasn't worked out well. It's worked out well for their economy, but they just think, leave Europe to themselves, we'll just get on working our own economy, growing our own economy, and becoming self-sufficient. So they did not believe that America should become the world's policeman, despite repeated attempts by Wilson. So he was determined, Wilson, to get the United States to join in with the League. Each attempt was thwarted by the United States Congress, so they blocked it at every turn. So without the United States, the remaining powerful countries were Britain and France. And as a result of this, anything that the League of Nations did must have the approval of Britain and France. So they were the most powerful nations in the League, but the First World War had damaged their capability, right? Remember, they didn't have this idea, they didn't want to run it. Both countries were militarily depleted and financially ruined. So like I said, they are going to be looking after themselves, and we'll see that quite a bit. So they're going to be looking after themselves rather than looking after everybody else in the League. So without the United States, their ability to act was severely restricted. They were finding it difficult to impose economic sanctions because the United States was one of the most powerful economic nations, and countries could still trade with them, because remember, they weren't in the League, so the League had no power to stop people from trading with them. So to top off the difficulties in membership, both Britain and France had different international priorities. Britain was preoccupied with the maintenance of the empire. So remember, we said before, if you look back at how many countries were in the British Empire at this point, and France was more interested in Germany and making sure they paid their reparations. So they aren't even on the same page themselves. France worried that Britain would not support her if she had problems with Germany, so would often go ahead without the League. And that, I'm going to come back to this word quite a bit in future videos. The League was massively undermined by its own leaders. So to finish off this section, then we're just going to have a look at another cartoon that really shows what impact the lack of membership of the USA had. So again, it's really important to know your cartoons, to know your figures. This is Uncle Sam, and he is the figure that is used to represent the USA. You'll see him a lot in cartoons. Keystone, USA. Keystone means the most important stone. So this League of Nations bridge was designed by the President of the United States. So if we put in our contextual knowledge in here, so we know that the League of Nations was Wilson's idea in the first place. So we can see the big countries that are in it. We've got Belgium, France, England, and Italy. And he is leaning on the keystone, which is the USA. So he's taken it out, and him being there, being separate, is this idea of isolation. Okay, they are alone. He doesn't actually seem to have a care either, does he? He's in a very laid back posture, doesn't seem to be worried about the fact that he's just led to the collapse of this bridge. He's having a smoke, he's late, he's getting on with things by himself and seems to be perfectly content in doing so. So here you've got a weak point in the bridge, which is because the keystone has been taken out of it. And what is actually going to happen here is what this cartoon is suggesting is that the absence of the USA will lead to the collapse of the League of Nations. Okay, so it's a massive thing that the USA isn't in it. So it doesn't matter that there's 58 countries in the League. Without the biggest powers, and when the USSR joins, when Germany joins, the League is going in the right direction. It's working towards exactly what it wanted to, but the USA not being in there causes so many problems, which we'll see as we go through this course again. So in the next video, I will be continuing with the League of Nations. If you haven't watched the previous one, please obviously feel free to go back and watch that. And there's also 4 on the Treaty of Versailles. So thank you for joining today. I hope this has been useful for you, and I will see you in the next video.